There is a particular kind of exhaustion that no one talks about. Not the tiredness that comes from running too far or working too late. Not the heaviness that follows a long emotional conversation or a difficult day. This is something quieter, something that lives deeper inside you. It is the exhaustion of a mind that never fully stops. A mind that is always turning something over, examining it from a new angle, following one thread until it unravels into 3 more, each one pulling you further into a landscape that feels vast, and sometimes beautiful, and sometimes completely overwhelming. You lie down at night, and your brain keeps moving. You sit in a conversation, and part of you is already 3 steps ahead, analyzing what was said, what was meant, what might happen next. You replay moments from years ago, not because you are stuck in the past, but because your mind is still working on them, still extracting meaning, still trying to understand something that maybe doesn't have a clean answer. And people have noticed. They've told you to relax, to stop overthinking, to just be present, to let it go. They say it like it's simple, like your mind is a faucet you can turn off if you just decide to. And you have smiled and nodded and maybe even tried to believe them, but the thinking doesn't stop. It never really stops. And somewhere along the way, you started to wonder if something was wrong with you. If this relentless inner world, this constant analysis, this inability to just exist without examining, was a problem to be fixed rather than something to be understood. This video is for you. Not to tell you how to stop, not to offer a 5-step plan for quieting your mind, but to offer you something far more valuable than that. Language, understanding, and the possibility that what you have been told is a flaw is actually something else entirely. Let's begin at the beginning. When psychologists study what they call higher order thinking, they are not talking about raw intelligence in the traditional sense. They are not talking about IQ scores or academic performance or how quickly you can solve a math problem. They are talking about something more nuanced, more layered, and far more human than any test can capture. They are talking about the capacity of a mind to turn itself inward, to examine its own processes, to hold complexity without collapsing it into something simpler and more comfortable. They are talking in many ways about exactly what you do. There is a concept in psychology called metacognition. It is, at its most basic, the ability to think about your own thinking, to observe your own mental processes from a slight distance, to notice patterns in how you reason, to question your own assumptions before they harden into certainty. Research on metacognition consistently shows that people who engage in this kind of reflective self-awareness perform better on complex reasoning tasks. They make fewer errors of overconfidence. They are less vulnerable to the kind of cognitive bias that leads people to see only what confirms what they already believe. They are, in the truest sense, better thinkers. Not because they are smarter in the conventional way, but because they have a relationship with their own mind that most people never develop. And here is the thing about metacognition that no one tells you. It is not always comfortable, because when you have the habit of questioning your own thinking. You cannot easily settle into false certainty. You cannot simply decide something is true and stop there. You keep asking. You keep examining. You notice the places where your reasoning might be flawed, where your emotions might be coloring your judgment, where you might be missing something important. And that is exhausting. Not because you are broken, but because you are doing something genuinely difficult that most people never attempt. When someone tells you that you think too much, what they are often really saying is that your level of engagement with ideas and experiences makes them uncomfortable, or that it is unfamiliar to them, or that they have found comfort in a simpler relationship with reality, and they cannot quite understand why you haven't done the same. They are not wrong that your mind is active. They are wrong about what that means. Because here's the truth most people miss. The mind that cannot stop thinking is not a mind that is malfunctioning. It is a mind that is deeply alive. It is a mind that takes the world seriously, that refuses to accept easy answers, that is genuinely curious about the texture of reality in a way that most people have been conditioned out of by the time they reach adulthood. You did not lose the capacity for wonder and replace it with endless, exhausting analysis. You kept both. And that is rarer than you know. If this is resonating with you, take a second to like the video and subscribe so you never miss a conversation like this one. Let's talk about what this actually looks like from the inside. Because there is a particular experience that people who think deeply share, and it is almost never described accurately from the outside. You are in a conversation and someone says something, and on the surface, you respond normally. You say the right things, you nod, you participate, but underneath, a part of your mind is doing something else entirely. It is noticing the subtext of what was said. It is connecting this moment to something that happened 3 weeks ago. It is wondering what the other person is feeling beneath what they are expressing. It is asking whether the assumption embedded in their statement is actually true. It is running through possible interpretations, possible responses, possible consequences, all in the span of a few seconds. All while you continue to appear perfectly present. This is not distraction. This is not absence. This is a mind operating on multiple levels simultaneously, processing not just the surface of an experience, but its depth, its context, its implications. Psychologists sometimes call this integrative complexity. The ability to hold multiple dimensions of a problem or situation at once without forcing them into premature resolution. And research on integrative complexity shows something fascinating. People who score high on this measure tend to be more creative, more adaptable in their thinking, and better at navigating genuinely complex situations where there is no single right answer. But integrative complexity has a cost, and the cost is that you rarely get to experience reality as simple. When other people see a clear path, you see the paths that branch off from it, the ones that might lead somewhere better or somewhere worse, the ones that haven't been considered. When other people feel certain, you feel the edges of that certainty, the places where it might not hold. And maybe that has always felt like a burden. But I want you to sit with this for a moment. The fact that you see complexity where others see simplicity is not a sign that you are confused. It is a sign that you are seeing more accurately. Reality is complex. The fact that your mind refuses to pretend otherwise is not a flaw in your perception. It is a form of honesty that most people never quite manage. There is something else that happens in minds like yours, and it has to do with the relationship between deep thinking and emotional sensitivity, because they almost always come together. If you are someone who thinks deeply, you are very likely also someone who feels deeply. Not in a dramatic or performative way, but in a quiet, pervasive way that means the world lands on you with more weight than it seems to land on others. A piece of music can stop you completely. A conversation can stay with you for days. A small moment of beauty or cruelty can shift something inside you in a way that feels disproportionate to its apparent significance. And you have probably wondered why you can't just let things pass the way other people seem to. The connection between deep thinking and deep feeling is not accidental. It has a neurological basis. The same neural architecture that supports complex, multi-layered thinking also tends to support heightened emotional processing. The brain regions involved in deep analysis are deeply interconnected with the limbic system, the emotional core of the brain. When one is highly active, the other tends to be as well. This is what researchers sometimes refer to when they talk about depth of processing. It is not just that you think more. It is that you experience more. You notice more. You absorb more from each moment, each interaction, each encounter with the world. And that richness of experience is genuinely beautiful, but it is also genuinely tiring, because there is no off switch, because the same depth that allows you to experience beauty profoundly also means that difficulty lands more heavily, that uncertainty feels more acute, that the unresolved stays unresolved in a way that you cannot simply choose to ignore. You have probably been told in various ways that you are too sensitive, too intense, too much, that you need to develop a thicker skin, to not take things so personally, to stop letting things affect you so deeply. And I want to gently offer a different perspective. The capacity for depth of feeling is not a vulnerability to be overcome. It is a form of perceptual richness that allows you to understand the world and the people in it with a precision that is genuinely rare. The problem has never been that you feel too much. The problem is that you have been living in a world that often doesn't know what to do with that kind of depth. I want to pause here and ask you something. When did you first realize that your mind worked differently from the people around you? Was there a moment, a conversation, a comment someone made that made you aware of just how deep your inner world actually ran? Leave that in the comments if you feel comfortable. Those moments of recognition matter, and someone reading your words might finally feel a little less alone in theirs. Let's go deeper, because there is another dimension to this that has to do with the relationship between overthinking and the need for certainty. Here is something that might surprise you. People who think deeply are not always searching for certainty. Research suggests that high-order thinkers are often more comfortable with ambiguity than average. They are better at tolerating uncertainty, better at holding a question open without forcing a premature answer. But there is a specific kind of uncertainty that is genuinely difficult for a mind like yours. It is not the uncertainty of not knowing. It is the uncertainty of not having thought something through completely. Of feeling like there might be an angle you haven't considered, a consequence you haven't accounted for, a possibility that hasn't been examined. Psychologists call this need for cognitive closure, and it exists on a spectrum. Some people have a very high need for it. They prefer to arrive at a definitive answer quickly, even if that answer is imperfect. Others are more comfortable sitting with ambiguity and open-ended questions. People who think deeply tend to fall into this second category, but with a particular twist. They are not uncomfortable with questions that don't have answers. They are uncomfortable with questions they haven't fully explored. There is a difference, and that difference is important. What looks like overthinking from the outside is, often, from the inside, the experience of a mind that is not willing to close a question before it has been properly examined. Not because you are anxious, though anxiety can certainly be part of the picture, but because you have a deep, almost moral commitment to thoroughness, to not missing something important, to not forming a belief on incomplete information when more information is available. That is not a flaw. That is intellectual integrity. That is the same quality that makes great scientists reluctant to publish before the data is sufficient, that makes great writers revise long after others would have called it done, that makes great leaders think through consequences that their more impulsive counterparts never consider. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with thinking deeply, and it is one of the most under-acknowledged experiences in the landscape of human psychology. It is not the loneliness of being without people. You may have plenty of people around you. It is the loneliness of feeling like your inner world, the one that is so vivid, complex, and constantly moving, is largely invisible to the people in your life. The loneliness of having a conversation that stays on the surface when you are longing to go deeper. The loneliness of caring about ideas and questions that the people around you find puzzling or exhausting or simply uninteresting. This experience has been studied. Researchers who work with people of high intellectual and emotional complexity consistently find that one of the most significant challenges these individuals face is not the thinking itself. It is the isolation that can come from feeling fundamentally different from the people around them. Not better, not superior, simply different in a way that makes genuine connection feel difficult to find and precious when it appears. And if you have felt this, if you have sat across from someone and felt the distance between your inner world and theirs, and wondered if you would ever find someone who could really meet you there, I want you to know that this feeling is real. It is not arrogance. It is not antisocial. It is the natural consequence of having a particular kind of inner life in a world that has not always made space for it. You are not too much. You have simply been looking for the right kind of space. And that space exists. The people who can meet you in that depth exist. They are often, in fact, watching videos exactly like this one. Let's talk about the difference between overthinking and deep thinking, because they are not the same thing, even though they can look similar from the outside and sometimes even feel similar from the inside. Overthinking, in the clinical sense, is a pattern of repetitive, ruminative thought driven by anxiety that tends to circle without resolution. It is the mind spinning on the same point over and over, not to gain new insight, but because it is caught in a loop of worry or self-criticism or catastrophizing. It is exhausting in a particular way, a kind of mental friction that generates heat without light. But deep thinking is something different. Deep thinking is generative. It moves. It discovers. It makes connections between things that weren't previously connected. It finds the thread that leads somewhere new. It is the mind doing what it is actually designed to do at its highest capacity. And the experience of deep thinking, while it can be tiring, has a different quality to it. There is often a sense of aliveness in it, a sense of being genuinely engaged, even when the questions are difficult or the terrain is uncomfortable. The challenge for many deeply thinking people is that these two modes, the ruminative and the generative, can blur together. Especially when you are tired, especially when you are under stress, especially when the questions you are turning over are emotionally charged, ones that touch your sense of safety or belonging or worth. In those moments, what begins as genuine inquiry can slide into anxious repetition. And the key to navigating that is not to stop thinking. It is to learn to recognize which mode you are in. To ask yourself, is this thought moving? Is it taking me somewhere new, revealing something I didn't see before? Or is it circling? Is it spinning on the same point without resolution? Research on what psychologists call rumination versus reflection makes this distinction clearly. Rumination is characterized by passive, repetitive focus on negative feelings and their possible causes and consequences. It tends to increase distress and is associated with depression and anxiety. Reflection, by contrast, is characterized by purposeful self-examination, oriented toward understanding rather than worry. And the research shows that the same tendency toward self-examination that can tip into rumination under stress is, in its healthy form, one of the most powerful predictors of psychological growth and resilience. The mind that turns inward is the mind that learns. The question is what it is turning inward toward, and whether it is doing so with curiosity or with fear. Let's talk about the relationship between deep thinking and the way we make decisions, because this is an area where the deeply thinking mind has genuine advantages that are often obscured by the frustration of the process. Behavioral science has documented extensively the ways in which human decision-making goes wrong. Confirmation bias, which leads us to seek out information that confirms what we already believe. Availability bias, which leads us to overweight information that is easy to recall. The sunk cost fallacy, which leads us to continue investing in something simply because we have already invested in it. These are not rare errors. They are the default settings of the human mind under normal conditions. But research also shows that people who engage in deliberate, reflective thinking, who slow down before deciding, who question their own assumptions, who actively consider alternative possibilities, are significantly less vulnerable to these biases. They catch themselves in the act of motivated reasoning more often. They are more likely to update their beliefs when new evidence appears. They are more likely to consider the possibility that they are wrong before committing to a course of action. And this is exactly what deeply thinking people do, often without even realizing it is a skill. The habit of questioning your own thinking, of sitting with a decision rather than rushing to closure, of considering the angles that haven't been considered, is not anxious indecision. It is the cognitive equivalent of due diligence, and while it can slow you down in ways that are sometimes frustrating, it also protects you from the kind of catastrophic errors that come from moving too fast, from deciding on incomplete information, from mistaking confidence for accuracy. If you have ever been in a meeting or a conversation where everyone else seemed ready to move forward, and you were the ones saying, "Wait, but what about this? What about that?" What happens if you were being the person in the room who was willing to sit with discomfort long enough to see what others had missed? And yes, that can be frustrating for the people who want to move faster, but it is also often the thing that saves a project, a relationship, a plan from a failure that everyone else was too eager to avoid seeing. You are not the problem. You are often the safeguard. Now, I want to turn to something that I think is at the heart of why this matters, not just intellectually, but personally. Because I think many people who think deeply carry a particular kind of wound. And it is the wound of having been made to feel that the very thing that is most essentially them, the quality of their mind, the depth of their engagement, the relentlessness of their inner world, is somehow too much. You were probably the child who asked too many questions, who needed to understand why, not just what, who noticed things that others didn't and said so, sometimes at inconvenient moments, who couldn't just accept an answer that didn't make sense, who pushed back, who kept going when everyone else was ready to stop. And maybe that was celebrated sometimes, but maybe it was also exhausting for the people around you. Maybe you were told, gently or not so gently, to stop, to be simpler, to just go along. And maybe some part of you learned to hide the depth of your thinking, to perform a simpler version of yourself in certain contexts, to hold back the questions you were actually asking, to present conclusions without showing the labyrinthine process that led to them, because you had learned that the process was too much for the room. And maybe you have been doing that for so long that you have started to wonder if the simpler version is the real one. It is not. The depth is not the problem. The depth is the gift, even when it doesn't feel like one, even when it exhausts you, even when it isolates you, even when it makes simple things complicated in ways that you sometimes wish they weren't. The depth is what allows you to see what others miss, to understand what others can't articulate, to hold space for complexity when everyone else is reaching for simplicity, to be the person in the room who is actually thinking rather than performing the appearance of thinking. And I want to give you something that I think you may not have been given enough of. Permission. Permission to be exactly as complex as you are. Permission to think as deeply as you think. Permission to take as long as you need to reach a conclusion. Permission to hold questions open that others have already closed. Permission to be moved by things that others have already moved past. Permission to be, in the fullest sense, yourself. Because here is what I believe, and what the research supports. The world does not need more people who think less. The world needs more people who are willing to think more carefully, more thoroughly, more honestly, more deeply. The world needs more people who are willing to sit with the discomfort of genuine inquiry rather than reaching for the comfort of premature certainty. Who can hold complexity without collapsing it? Who can see the angles that others miss? Who can ask the questions that others are too comfortable or too hurried to ask? That is you. That has always been you. Let's spend a moment on something practical. Because the deeply thinking mind, for all its gifts, also genuinely needs care. The same capacity that makes you remarkable also makes you vulnerable to a particular kind of exhaustion, and that exhaustion is worth taking seriously. One of the most important things that research on cognitive load tells us is that the brain needs recovery time. Not just sleep, though sleep is essential, but genuine mental rest. Time when the mind is not required to perform at its highest level. Time for what psychologists call default mode network activity, the kind of loose, associative, wandering, mental activity that happens when we are not focused on a specific task. Walking without a destination, sitting without an agenda, letting the mind drift without directing it anywhere in particular. For deeply thinking people, this kind of rest is often difficult to access because the mind that is always turning something over doesn't easily shift into a lower gear. And there can be a kind of guilt associated with not being mentally productive. But here is what the research tells us. The default mode network, that wandering, seemingly unproductive mental state, is actually where a significant amount of creative insight happens. It is where connections between previously separate ideas get made. It is where the solution to a problem you have been consciously working on suddenly surfaces. The wandering is not wasted time. It is the other half of deep thinking, and giving it space deliberately and without guilt is not a luxury. It is a necessity. There is also something important about the role of other people in the life of a deeply thinking person. The tendency toward internal processing can sometimes create a kind of isolation that is not actually necessary. The deeply thinking mind often does its best work in conversation with another deeply thinking mind. Not in the kind of conversation that stays on the surface, but in the kind where both people are genuinely willing to go somewhere together, to follow an idea wherever it leads, to be changed by the encounter. These conversations are rare, but they are possible, and actively seeking them, whether in friendships, in communities of interest, in intellectual spaces online, or in person, is one of the most sustaining things a deeply thinking person can do. Not because you need others to validate your thinking, but because the mind, even the most independent mind, is partly a social organ. It developed in relationship. It often reaches its full capacity in dialogue. And the experience of being genuinely understood by another mind, of having your depth met with depth, is one of the most profoundly nourishing experiences available to a human being. If you have not yet found those conversations, I want you to know that the lack is not about you. It is about the scarcity of spaces where depth is welcomed. But those spaces exist, and the fact that you are here watching this is itself a sign that you are looking for them, that looking matters. Keep going. I want to close with something that I think is at the heart of everything we have explored today. You have spent a significant portion of your life being told, in various ways, that your mind is too active, too analytical, too careful, too much inside itself. And you have perhaps internalized some version of that message, perhaps begun to see your own thinking as a problem, as something to be managed or quieted or apologized for. And I understand why. When the world consistently reflects something back to you, it is very difficult not to start believing it. But here is what I want you to hear. The mind that never stops thinking is not a mind that is broken. It is a mind that is awake. Awake to complexity, to possibility, to the genuine difficulty of being alive in a world that is far more intricate than most people allow themselves to see. The exhaustion you feel is real, but it is the exhaustion of engagement, not of malfunction. It is the exhaustion of a mind that takes life seriously, that refuses to look away from difficulty, that is genuinely trying to understand rather than simply to cope. The habits of mind that you have, the questioning of your own thinking, the comfort with complexity, the willingness to sit with uncertainty rather than reaching for false certainty, the tendency to see the angles others miss, the depth of feeling that accompanies the depth of thought. These are not incidental. They are not accidents. They are the signature of a mind operating at a level that most people never reach, not because they couldn't, but because they were never asked to, because the culture around them made it easier to stay on the surface, because no one ever showed them what depth looked like or told them it was worth the effort. You found your way to depth anyway. Maybe because it was simply who you are. Maybe because something in your life required it of you. Maybe because you could not, even when you tried, be content with the surface. Whatever the reason, you are here, in this inner world that is sometimes exhausting and sometimes isolating and sometimes profoundly beautiful. And you are not alone in it. There are others who know this landscape, who have walked the same terrain of relentless inquiry and deep feeling, and the particular loneliness of a mind that can't quite find its match in the ordinary flow of everyday conversation. They are out there. Some of them are watching this right now. And the fact that we can name this experience, that we can give it language, that we can say this is real, and this is valid, and this is not a flaw, but a form of depth that deserves to be understood. That naming is not a small thing. That naming is the beginning of something. The beginning of carrying your own mind with less shame and more curiosity. Of seeing your inner world not as a burden to be managed, but as a landscape to be explored. Of recognizing that you are not broken, that you never were, that you are simply someone who thinks deeply and thoroughly and without apology, and that the world, whatever it has told you, genuinely needs that. You are allowed to be this. You have always been allowed to be this. And if no one has told you that clearly enough before now, let this be the moment. You are allowed to think as much as you think, to feel as much as you feel, to take as long as you need, to hold the questions that others have already put down, to be, in the fullest and most complete sense, the person that you are. If someone in your life has this same quality of mind, the kind of person who thinks too deeply, feels too much, and has been told too many times that they are all too much, consider sending them this video. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for someone is hand them the language they never had for something they have always carried. If this video found you at the right moment, if something in it gave language to an experience you have been carrying without words, I hope you will stay. There is more here, more exploration, more understanding, more of the kind of conversation that takes depth seriously and meets you where you actually are. Subscribe if you feel called to, and if you feel safe, leave something in the comments. Tell us what shifted for you while watching this, or what you wish someone had told you sooner about the way your mind works. Because someone out there, someone who thinks too much and feels too much, and has been told too many times that they are too much, might need your voice to feel a little less alone in their own mind. Thank you for watching. Thank you for thinking. And thank you for being exactly as much as you are. If this way of understanding yourself resonates, the video on the psychology of the empath who feels everything goes even deeper into what it means to experience the world with this kind of intensity, and why the sensitivity you have always been told to manage may be one of the most extraordinary things about you.